summer evening to talk about a complicated subject. Earlier this week, I wrote a brief article for Cleveland.com describing tonight's event, and I said that of all the issues facing Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, and Northeast Ohio, land use may be the most important and least discussed. That may sound surprising, given the challenges we face in terms of revitalizing our economy, addressing poverty and inequality, improving healthcare and education and social mobility, attracting new residents and businesses to reverse our population shrinkage in Northeast Ohio and shrinkage of our tax base here in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. But as I hope tonight's conversation will show, land use is the common thread that unites all of those topics. It's kind of like the one thing, if we could get right, it might just turn the region around. The fundamental issue that we'll get to in greater detail in a moment is that basically we're building more stuff, larger footprint here in terms of the land that we're occupying, while we have a shrinking population. So the equation is basically fewer people paying for more stuff. And that's not financially sustainable over the long haul. We'll get into the specifics in a moment. And I'll also be using about a dozen slides that I think will function as visual aids. We may not get to all of them. In fact, we may not cover all of the topics that we've outlined tonight. But we'll do our best and see how far we get. First, I want to introduce our panel. We've got a terrific group here to tackle some of the most important issues facing Northeast Ohio. Farthest from me, on your left, is Glenn Coyne, the Executive Director of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, which helps to set overall land use planning and policy for the county and helps specific communities with local area plans, and also spearheads projects such as the East Side Greenway, which we'll hear a little bit more about later this evening. To Glenn's left is Lee Weingart, former Cuyahoga County Commissioner, Republican, who served from 1995 to 97, and who is the president and founder of LNE Grp, a lobbying and advocacy firm. To Lee's left is David Beach, director of the GreenCityBlueLake Institute at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, a think tank on land use, planning, and environmental policy. And to David's left is Grace Gallucci, Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Areawide Coordinating Agency, which oversees transportation policy and spending in Cuyahoga and parts of adjacent counties. So a word about our format tonight. I'll frame questions for our panelists and ask questions to get things going. And I'll aim specific questions at specific panelists, but on other questions I'll ask everybody to respond. And panelists, if you'd like to respond to something that one of the other has said, just please signal me and you'll have the floor. After we talk for a while, as mentioned before, we'll open things up for your written comments and questions. So to get things rolling, I thought we should define land use, and I'm going to move ahead with the slide here. Beautiful. Okay. So basically, land use could be defined as the density and intensity with which you use a piece of land. So one example of redevelopment that's adding density and vitality, hopefully, would be the Van Aken project in Shaker Heights, where you see 2, 3, 4-story buildings coming on footprints around that intersection of Chagrin, Van Aken, and Lawrenceville Center, where you now have low-rise, 1-story strip shopping centers and lots and lots and lots of asphalt. So this would be taking all that asphalt, breaking it up, and then putting development on it, so we get more residents, more business, tax base, and economic activity. So I wanted to ask the panel, folks, why do you think land use is an important subject that we ought to be discussing in terms of the future of Northeast Ohio? Glenn, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thanks, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay if I talk like this? Okay. I think land use is important to identify the history of where we were. And in planning, we try to figure out where we were, where we're going, and how we want to get there. And Interestingly, in this region, our land use pattern was established by folks who were primarily focused on our commerce. That they were interested in where the industry was going to go, where the businesses were going to be, and then the people where they live filled in after that. So it's a very mercantile-oriented history of why Cleveland is here, because we have the shipping, we have the river, steel, all that kind of stuff. So obviously, a lot of those things are no longer the priority. So the way we developed and the reasons we developed this region changed drastically. So there are some who would like to keep our land use just the way it's always been and fix it. And I think rather than that, we have to take a look at what are the future demands, what are the future generations going to be looking for, and how are they going to arrange themselves. So to conclude, we spent a lot of time as planners from when we started being planners back in the late 1890s up until about the 1980s, keeping people separate. We wanted you to live in one area, shop in one area, go to school in a different area, and work in a different area. We built everything around that model. Well, now people want to walk places, they want to live closer to where they work, they want to be able to walk to school. So now the pressure is on mixed use where everything is grouped closer together. So I think therein lies a real conflict for us in how we used to think about land use and how we need to think about it for the future.
Yeah, in fact, the Shaker Van Aken project would be an example of that, because instead of the single use of retail strip, you could have office, retail, entertainment, and possibly even housing in this development at Shaker. Lee, would you like to address that?
Sure. So first off, as you heard, I am not a planning expert. I am a recovering politician and a current lobbyist. So my interest tonight will be very much kind of rubber on the road type of things. Why is land use important? I think it's because resources are very constrained and limited. Resources for land, resources for infrastructure, resources to support people. So you have to figure out how to take this limited pool of resources, which we'll just call tax dollars to make it easy, and apply it across the area so that you get the highest and best use out of those tax dollars. So if people all live together in the central city, you could obviously limit how much you spend on infrastructure, on highways, on pipes and sewers, things like that. But people will move out because they want to get more land, they want to be out of the city center, whatever the reason is. So I think it's important when you think about constricted resources that we have in government and in society to take those resources and deploy them in the most efficient way. And land use is a critical part of deploying your limited resources in an efficient way.
David?
Well, I go back to what you said about how land use is a fundamental underlying phenomenon that underlies all the other issues. So the way we lay things out on our landscape, all the stuff, the communities, the roads, the systems, that underlies our performance for our fiscal tax base, where that is, which communities benefit, which ones don't. It underlies all of our environmental problems. As we sprawl outward, we're all driving more. That's the key to our air quality issues. We're paving over the landscape. That's our biggest water quality problem. It's an energy issue because of the carbon emissions. And it's also, in addition to economic and environmental, it's a big social issue because the way we've sprawled out has left concentrated pockets of poverty in the urban core, which is a key dynamic in all of our social problems. So land use just underlies all these other issues.
Terrific, thank you. Grace, your perspective.
Well, I think each of the panelists have stated exactly why land use is important. And to add to that, thinking about land as a finite resource. And we have a limited amount of land, although some in Northeast Ohio might say that we have an unlimited amount, and that's part of the problem. But it is a finite resource, and we need to develop it in a way that makes sense, and that is a long-term approach. Too many times, if land use planning isn't really a part of a development, it can be chaotic, it can be unintelligent, and the impacts of that very disorganized way of development will impact a community in many, many ways, as David noted, everything from social to economic and beyond. And we don't want to continue to support anything that doesn't work for us in the long term. We've got to think about where we were yesterday, today, but we really have to plan for tomorrow. And I think land use I often think of as part of a planning process, and there isn't a good business, a successful business, that wouldn't have a business plan, that wouldn't do real estate development in a logical, fashionable way for their own success. Developing and unfettered growth just aren't really something that you see in a successful business. You see controlled growth.
Right, thank you. So I think the problem that we have in Northeast Ohio is that we've got a very, very complex array of local governments. We've got 12 counties in this region, 400 units of government, and it's the localities that control planning and zoning. There's no central authority that tells everybody what to do. However, we did lay out highways in the 1950s and 60s that facilitated suburban expansion. And you can see the results here in this slide panel if you look around. I'm sorry, it's behind you. But the point of this comparison is to show what's happened over time in Northeast Ohio as a result of our land use pattern. The graphic on the left shows that, let's see, we have sprawled outward in 1970, consuming 400 square miles over the past 40 years, from 1970 to 2010. And in the process, the areas that are shaded in green and orange have grown enormously. Those are the thinly settled suburban areas served by highways and other kinds of infrastructure. Served by the automobile, and meanwhile the cities, which used to be those solid orange shapes, are turning into kind of a Swiss cheese as they begin to hollow out. So you have less density in the urban core and more people living out on the suburban fringe, served by automobiles. So I wanted to ask the panel to talk about those decisions and preferences that people were making as sort of an unintended consequence of the highway era. Is that why we're facing the problems that we're facing now? Is it mainly highways, or are there other drivers, pardon the pun, this situation that we face? Grace, why don't we start with you, since we're planning the other time?
There's no doubt that the development, building of highway system over the last 50 years has influenced land use and development patterns. Roads are built to move people and goods. It's about mobility. So there's no doubt that once you build a road, people will use it to move themselves and their goods. When you look specifically at the highway system, remember it was part of the National Defense Act, and that part of the reason that we built a highway system was to be able to disperse the population. And to sort of add to that, around the same time, we were post-World War II, and there were a tremendous amount of financial incentives to build new houses out in the suburban areas and the outlying areas. And so when you look at the highways and the incentives relative to the housing situation, of course, yes.
David?
So, yeah, I mean, as Grace just said, after World War II, it was a deliberate strategy by the U.S. government to bolster our economy by promoting all the things that went into the suburbanization of America. So from the auto industry to the road industry to the housing industry, all those things came together to dramatically deconcentrate our population across the landscape. Some people say it was just the actions of the free market, but it was heavily influenced and abetted by all kinds of government policies, from the Highway Act that built the interstate highway system to the home mortgage interest deduction, which is millions of dollars of subsidies for home ownership, and all kinds of other subsidies.
Yeah, I think you raised a very powerful point about the market being shaped by government. Lee, your perspective.
So, in 1900, the rich people in Cleveland lived on Euclid Avenue, Standard Oil and its progeny of companies, and they moved out to the first planned community in the country, Shade Heights, where I live, and then kept moving. And there are a variety of reasons people leave the core of the city. If there's poverty there, if they don't want to live near where they work, if they want more land, if they want to be in a different location. So certainly the highways facilitated that movement, but people were probably going to move anyway. They were just kind of being pushed out for a variety of reasons. So you can blame the highways, or you can say the highways were just the avenue out of town for people who wanted to go out anyway.
Well, it's Thomas Jefferson also wanted to live way out on the suburbs of Virginia on his mountaintop Monticello, and that image is certainly provocative for many people. Glenn, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when we go and the last person can say, yeah, what everybody else said. But, I mean, we can't discount that the American dream was to live in the suburbs in a house and to buy your own house with a low-cost mortgage and fill your car up with cheap gas. And I mean, yeah, the highways helped you do that, but there were a lot of other things going on that cities were seen as dirty, they were industrial, they were crowded, and people wanted to go home and have quiet, and that's where they wanted to live. And then the next day when they got up and went to work, they fought the battle in the city. So I think, sure, the highways facilitated it, but there's lots of other communities around the country that saw the same thing, but people rode the train, or they had other ways of getting around. So I just think you have to look at the time period that this happened and what was going on. And we didn't have real good environmental laws, and it really was, if you remember, downtown Cleveland with the steel mills right down the river, and it was great because they were cranking out dollar signs every 3 shifts a day, and cars were rolling off the plant, and Chevy and Ford, and people wanted to, that's how I work, but I want to live somewhere different from where I work. And I think that was a very powerful.
Right. It was the American dream. David, you wanted to add something?
So it's really complex. There are some things push people out of cities, the negative things. Some people pull them out. But I still think that what makes me angry is that we were sold one American dream, you know, that one Ozzie and Harriet suburban dream. And there should be hundreds of American dreams and different styles of life. And we had this one way of doing it for so long. And I think that's what's been harmful. And that's why we have these homogenous suburbs throughout the United States now. One of the things that I get most excited about today is how young people, and even baby boomers like me, are deciding, well, there's different American dreams. I'd rather live in a walkable neighborhood in the city. That's my American dream.
So there could be
that dream was manufactured for certain ends, certain economic ends.
So there could be a push as well as a pull to a different way of doing things. I think where I'd like to lead the conversation next is what have the consequences of this suburbanization been over the past few decades. So this is a pair of charts from the Vibrant Neo Vision, which is the work product of, I'm going to try to get this right, Grace, because it's such a mouthful, the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. Don't try to say it 10 times fast. This was a very, very important planning effort that was led by Grace's agency, by NOACA, which helped to secure a $4.2 million grant from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development to sort of pull together data from the 12 counties of Northeast Ohio and to ask the question, if you extended the current pattern of development that the panel is talking about, if you just did a straight line extension of that into the future, where would we end up? And these two diagrams here basically tell you what's going to happen. You have 1.7 million housing units in 2010, and over the next, between now and 2040, 175,000 units are going to be abandoned. That's 10.5% of the total. We're losing 18 units of housing. Remember, the overall picture is population down, territory expanding, so there's less demand for that housing supply in the urban core where people are moving away. There's less demand. The market is weak. And for a variety of reasons, including predatory lending, foreclosure crisis, et cetera, there's been a lot of abandonment which keeps on eating away at the value of adjacent properties. So the prediction here is 18 units per day from now until 2040. And if you only tore down 1/3 of those units to try to fix the situation, you'd spend $500 million. That's over the 12 counties. The other chart on the right looks at local budgets. This is where sprawl and the kind of development pattern that we have now is going to hit every one of us in the pocketbook. Today you can see on the left that 1.5% plus or minus average relationship between municipal revenue and spending. So if you're above the line, you've got more revenue and you're in the green. Below the line, you're in the red. And this chart tells us that across the 12 counties and 400 localities, you have that fairly compact spread. Doesn't look too bad. But look out to 2040, and what you see is if we continue in the pattern that we're moving right now in the same direction, the best off county in 2040 is going to be worse off than the worst off community today. And the range in terms of red ink below the line is just, unimaginable. So this is probably not going to happen because nothing ever moves in a straight line, and the obvious issue, I think, is that communities would be raising taxes so this doesn't happen. And I think what this is telling us, Grace, is that the Vibrant Neo prediction is that we have an economically, financially, fiscally unsustainable pattern going here, right?
Absolutely.
You want to tell us about what Vibrant Neo and the NEOSCC plan to do about this?
Well, I'm going to read you a quote from Steve Hambley, who was the first chairman of the Sustainable Communities Consortium, who is a conservative Republican commissioner from Medina County and was also on my board. He says, everyone has a role to play in creating a vibrant and prosperous future for Northeast Ohio. And I think that sort of set the tone for the Vibrant Neo 2040 plan and the process. It's one of these things where we say the plan is important. Our objective was to develop a regional consensus on how to keep our region vibrant. But at the same time, the process that we went through was equally as important as developing the plan. The process included engagement of citizens all across 12 counties. In many regards, it was the first time various communities interacted with each other and looked at themselves as one region. We were talking about Cleveland, Akron, Canton, and Youngstown. Yes, that's Northeast Ohio, but how often do people really think about how they're interrelated? And then you can take that further and drill it down, and within the Cleveland region, for example, we've got 5 counties and 250 municipalities. And how do we all relate to each other, and what do we do? Well, the effort allowed us to have those conversations. It allows us to come to a consensus where we came up with a vision that included some theme areas, 4 theme areas, 9 recommendations, and 41 initiatives to help get us there. And the really good part of it about it was the recognition that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution or approach, that in fact every community is different. And we want to respect the integrity of that community and respect how the communities have grown and how they intend or want to continue to grow or not grow. And so those recommendations and initiatives can be taken individually or as a grouping, and they're all to be implemented at the local government level. So this organization is not going to impose anything on any community. It's about showing you alternatives, similar to what David said. How many other American dream scenarios are there? So we explore those, and we help communities to identify what could be good for them, what could be bad for them, or if they're perfectly happy the way they are, and allows them to move forward.
So I landed on this slide and on this question because I believe that this process is so important, but I want Grace to just add a couple more words about where things stand right now and what we can expect to see. This report, this vision was finished in 2014 and won some big planning awards. Where does it go next, and how is it constituted right now?
So if you think about it in 2 phases, the first phase was the development of the plan. And we were very fortunate in Northeast Ohio, but we also put a lot of work behind the obtaining of a $4.2 million grant that allowed us to develop this plan. And as I said, it was the process and the plan itself. The plan has been recognized by the American Planning Association with the Daniel Burnham Award, which is its highest honor, suggesting that it is the best regional plan in the country. So we received that award this year. That says that we did a good job, and one of the reasons they gave us the award was the engagement process that we went through. And so then how does this take us to where we are now? We're done with the plan. A plan can sit on a shelf. We all know of plans that, and books that are never read and plans that are never done. We don't want that to happen. There's a lot in the plan, and as I said, even if one recommendation or one initiative is done by one community, we're that much better off than we were yesterday. So the idea is that the old board of the organization that was supporting the development of the plan is now going to morph into a new board that will be responsible for the implementation of the plan. And when I say implementation, we need to be careful because I just also got done saying it's implemented at the local level. So what will this organization do for implementation? Well, it's a tough question, it's a tough call when we look at how to do that. But the organization will look at how to ensure that the recommendations, the initiatives, the vision of the plan makes its way out into the community in several different ways, in advocating for the plan and its solutions, for engaging and continuing to communicate with the public, and for providing technical assistance to communities that need help. So there's several different ways that we can do that, and we're looking now, we're in a phase that we're calling between the plan and implementation, we're trying to figure out how to do it. We're calling that the launch board phase. That's where we are. We hope to have that completed by the end of the year. We're in the process of a strategic design for the new board and for the structure of the organization, and we hope to have that completed and launched by the beginning of 2016.
That's great, thank you, and please continue reading about that in Plain Dealer because I'll be paying attention and we'll be talking. So first I want to go to Lee. Tell me your take on all of this. Can this work? Is it too complicated?
So I said at the beginning I'm not a planner, I'm a practitioner, and so let me give you one example. So my view is there's no grand solution to the land use problem in Cuyahoga County or anywhere in the world. But there are niche solutions that you can use that I would call creative or smart redevelopment that actually work. So about 8 years ago, I got a call from then Treasurer Jim Rokakis, who said, "Are you still a Republican?" I go, "Yes, Jim, I'm still a Republican. But I need your help in Columbus." Jim had an idea that we would take in the abandoned properties in the city of Cleveland, take them into what he called a land bank at the time, using other people's money, mostly the mortgage companies that had mortgaged up these houses and they were then walking away from them, and bring them into the land bank and then either sell them, fix them up, or knock them down. He told stories of whole streets in the city of Cleveland where there would be maybe 10 houses on the street, 8 would be abandoned, 1 should be abandoned, and 1 was occupied by a woman hanging on by her fingernails. Of the 8 that were abandoned, maybe 3 were crack houses or other problems going on there. So we went down to the Republican General Assembly, this will shock many of you, and the Republican Governor, Bob Taft, who agreed with us that we ought to create a mechanism in Cuyahoga County to get started to try and bring in some of these dilapidated, falling down houses that could be, frankly, knocked down, which most of them have been, could be preserved if possible and sold if possible. So we got it through the General Assembly, the governor signed it on December 29th, I think. And since then, the Cuyahoga Land Bank has brought in over 1,000 properties, of which 64% have been knocked down. That creates either redevelopment opportunities or more green space in the city of Cleveland. 220 have been sold, and roughly 200 have been fixed up and then sold. So to me, that won't solve the entire problem of abandonment in housing in Northeast Ohio. But it's a little niche solution in the city of Cleveland that frankly grew beyond the city of Cleveland because there are now land banks in 6 counties around the state of Ohio in the Dayton area, Cincinnati, Columbus. They recognize the leadership that Jim Rokakis and Cuyahoga County took to try and claim back some of these abandoned properties and turn them into something smart through smart redevelopment.
Right, so I think crisis breeds innovation, and the type of high-powered, supercharged land bank that Lee is talking about actually got started in Flint, Michigan.
That's right.
And our land bank here at Cuyahoga County was the first really large-scale version of that outside the state of Michigan, and really has been picked up in 8 or 9 or 10 other states now. So this movement is growing across the country. David and Glenn, you want to talk about what you think are the prospects for realizing the vision of Vibrant Neo? How realistic is this voluntary approach to something, to an area of governance in which power is really very locally held?
Well, you know, I take sort of a realistic view of it too. I guess I fall down on these side of things, but you know, we've still got 1.2, 1.3 million people that live in Cuyahoga County. They are investing in their properties. They're happy to be here, and there's quality of life issues that we need to address for the people that we have. And I think when we do that, when we fix the schools, we address the crime and perception of crime issue, when we talk about the taxes, we figure out our stormwater issues. There's a lot of things that if we fix for the people that live here, we're not going to have to worry about people continuing to leave, and we're not going to have to worry about attracting new people because they're going to hear about us. We've got a lot of assets here that other parts of the country don't have, all consolidated in a pretty tight little space. And I even would go as large as the 11 or 12 or 14 counties, whatever the number is, but you know, we've got the lake, we've got rail, we've got airports, we've got metro parks, we've got things all in a pretty concentrated area that if we do it right, not only will it help the quality of life for people that are here, which are paying our taxes and our salaries now, but other people will see that and say, that's a place where I want to locate. And most of those things are going to happen in the previously developed areas. They're not going to happen out in greenfields. They're going to take advantage of the assets that we already have. And I think that's really important.
David?
Yeah, I want to echo some of the earlier comments that the NEOS vision and framework really was a solid piece of work. I guess the best diagnosis of the problems that we've had to date, and that goes back probably 30 or 40 years, and it's probably the best list of potential solutions that we have. So I encourage you all to take a look. You can go to vibrantneo.org and see all the materials. However, it's also, these are the most complex and difficult and controversial issues that we're going to face as a region, and we're set up to fail. You know, with our government fragmentation, all those hundreds of units of local government, all of which have their own control of land use. We're a home rule state. Each one of those mayors out there is trying to maximize his or her own tax base and build more at the expense of someone else. So these are really difficult problems. If they were easy, we would have solved this long ago. But people have been working on this for years. Former State Representative Art Brooks is here. He was working on this back in, what, the 70s? So there was a state land use commission working on these issues back in the 70s. So things keep kind of going around. So I'm hopeful that maybe we'll get it right this time and something will change.
Yeah, so to add a note of urgency to the conversation about Cuyahoga County, presenting here some research by Tom Beyer, who has taught at Cleveland State University for many years, and he's an expert on housing dynamics and the local economy in Northeast Ohio. So he's telling us, based on his research, that notwithstanding all of the things that Glenn Coyne said about Cuyahoga County, which are absolutely true, wonderful place to live, we love it, we're proud of it. Nevertheless, we have lost 175,000 inhabitants between 1985 and 2010, while the adjacent counties, this is the pattern that David is talking about, have grown by 258,000 people. That's our immediately contiguous neighbors. Cuyahoga County is going to have trouble dealing with that because the surface area, the land area that we have to deal with in Cuyahoga is approaching build out. So that means if you're going to do anything new, you got to tear down. You got a brownfield or some previously developed area to contend with. Meanwhile, over this recent period from 1994 to 2013, as Beyer reports, residential, commercial, and industrial properties lost 5.1% of their value, or $4.1 billion. And growing areas in adjacent counties, which are growing at our expense, added 45.7% in value, or $35 billion. Do we, panel, do we address this problem by pursuing the kinds of solutions that were talked about at the last panel discussion in this series by County Executive Armand Budish and Eddie Krause, who's the Chief of Regional Collaboration? And that's by, sharing services and finding ways to, cut here and there and to create cooperation, say, between fire departments that are going to use the same dispatch. Do you solve this problem by doing that, or do you have to think bigger? Grace, you want to start?
Yeah, I think that you absolutely have to start with that, and cleaning up and trying to be more efficient is a terrific way to make some progress. But I think the problem is much more complicated than that. And you have to think bigger in the sense that, what's the real problem? The real problem is that we have a population that is either stagnant or shrinking in the region. Whether you're looking at the 12-county region or you're looking at the 5-county region, the story is the same. And yet we keep building further and further out, and so we're increasing our infrastructure, we're increasing our footprint. All of that together is not sustainable. You don't have to be a math whiz to figure out that the same number of people paying for all of this additional infrastructure, whether it be schools, whether it be roads, whether it be utilities, whether it be sewers, they're all things that have to be built, and somebody has to pay for them. And today we can say, well, it's not my community, they have to pay for it. Or we can look at who's winning and who's losing today. But really, we all lose tomorrow. And that's really what we have to focus on, is that the region needs everybody. The region needs all components of the cities, as well as the exurbs, as well as the suburbs. We all need to work together, and we all need to recognize the interdependency of each of those units of government and each of the assets that are within those communities, whether they be business or whether they be cultural or social. We have to respect and value all of it and recognize that if we distort the balance, we're all going to lose.
David, this is something that you've written about a lot in your career. You have tried to help us to engender a sense of regional identity, which we don't really have. We're from Cleveland, we're from Shaker, we're from Beachwood, we're from all of these little micro points on the map. We don't see ourselves as part of something larger. How hard has it been for you to try to create that sense of we're all in it together?
I think that the regional identity might rise and fall based on how LeBron is doing it. We're all from Cleveland as long as someone's winning, but I think if you look at the important things in our lives, a lot of them are regional in scale. So we have a regional economy, a regional housing market, we have regional media, we have we all move about the region irrespective of city boundaries. We live and work and shop, go to school in different places. So we act as regional citizens already in a way, but we're constrained by these arbitrary boxes of our cities. These boundaries that were set years ago and really somehow in many ways don't serve us well today. So it is hard. I've always pushed we should be thinking about the natural landscape in our bioregion. How does nature want us to behave here in this landscape in northeast Ohio on the shore of the Great Lake? How should we live as human beings and live here sustainably over the long term based on these natural resources that are here? So that's part of the vision I think we need to get move towards.
Grace, you wanted to add something? Yeah,
I just wanted to add that, again, when you think about the base problem, same population, increasing footprint. Another way to deal with this is we don't have to accept the reality of a shrinking population. We could start putting together different strategies to gain population. And if we're gaining population, that means we are gaining individuals that could support the infrastructure that we've now built.
I think this could go in so many different directions because we can't get the people unless we get the jobs, and then this turns into a different discussion. Lee, I wanted to ask you in the context of are we all in this together? People have individual preferences and don't want to be told, where or how they should live. So how, given that reality, how do we create a sense that we are all in this together? The folks who live in the disinvested neighborhoods in Cleveland are a part of our region. We can't walk away from that. We have other responsibilities to people living further out. How do we get a sense of being all together?
I think there's the reality of what we express to people outside of Ohio and once we're inside of Ohio. So if you go to California and someone says, where are you from? You say, well, I'm from Cleveland. But you're not. You're from Shaker Heights or Strongsville or Westlake or Bay Village or somewhere like that. But when you come back here, you're from Shaker Heights, or you're from Bay Village, or you're from the city of Cleveland. Local government reform is very, very hard, right? It took a bad commissioner and a bad auditor to change over the county form of government from 3 commissioners to a county executive and a county council. Others here tell us all about that. Trying to reform local government like municipalities is a heck of a lot harder than the county. Do we need 53 mayors, 53 city council presidents, 53 police chiefs, 53 fire chiefs? Absolutely not. But they all make a lot of money. They've got a car, maybe a driver, maybe a secretary, and they're not going to give it up. So they might say that it's a great idea to combine Orange, Pepper Pike, Moreland Hills, and Woodmere, which was tried a couple of years ago. But even those 4 small communities couldn't come together, even with the exit of 1 or 2 mayors in those communities. So I think it's a reality, unfortunately, that we're going to continue to have these 53 municipalities that make up Cuyahoga County. We're going to find other ways to save our precious resources and devote them to land use and other important purposes.
Glenn, do we need to see tax-based sharing or other kinds of techniques that would, spread the wealth, so to speak?
I'm really not an expert to talk about that. I think that we do have to start having conversations among several communities as to what common issues do they have that they need to work together to address. And that quickly gets into taxation. But I think you're starting to see there are communities that have 2 or 3 cities that have 1 school district, for example. That's a place to start. There are communities that share commercial areas. And we have the luxury right now of helping out Cleveland Heights, University Heights, and Beachwood with their master plans. Well, University Heights is in a great spot because they get to help along with the Cleveland Heights side, and they're also going to be able to help on the Green Road side with Beachwood. So those conversations are happening very early and very small, but those are the kind of things I think that are going to start to happen. I think there's going to be a financial point where communities are going to have to ask themselves, can we sustain? And I think the schools are much bigger than the cities in terms of budgets, and they're seeing that already, and have consolidated and will continue to consolidate. I mean, down in Berea Mid-Park is another recent example from a couple years ago. So I think that is foretelling the future for us, that what happens in the education system is going to manifest itself in the municipal system.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be fun. And Lee's right. People are not going to want to give up their car and their secretary and their driver.
Yes.
And then he's right. And then you add the unions on top of that, and there's bargaining and everything else that's involved that it's very complicated. That's why I can't speak about the tax code.
Okay.
So just one idea maybe on revenue sharing. This will be very unpopular in this room tonight, I suspect.
Okay.
Let's go. I live in Shaker Heights, which has the highest taxes in the galaxy, except some part maybe in Pluto, which may have slightly higher taxes. Beachwood, where we are tonight, has much lower taxes. Mainly because of places like Beachwood Place and the industrial divisions that make up the city of Beachwood. In my estimation, property taxes that are generated by homes should stay in the community. But those that are generated from industrial or retail areas should be somehow pulled together at the county level and shared in some way with the residents of the county. So that Shaker Heights, where I live, can pay a slightly lower property tax, and maybe a slightly higher property tax in Beachwood. Because my wife is likely to shop at Beachwood Place as someone whose wife lives in Beachwood to shop at Beachwood Place.
A big idea. I like it. Thank you. You heard it here first. Popular? Yes?
I actually do live in the highest tax district. It's a little bit Shaker Square.
Ah, that's right, it is. That's right.
Shaker Schools.
Shaker Schools paying the property tax.
We'll go back to your last slide.
Sure.
Tom Byer up there, the kind of tax-based sharing that he's been advocating for many years is to capture the new increase, this is maybe a variation of your thing, the increase in commercial and industrial tax base that occurs in the county, or even at a regional, multi-county scale. And then that goes into a regional pool and is distributed to the lower tax value communities that need it the most. And so what it does is help to level out the tax base, bring the weakest players up, so the whole region is stronger and there are no weak links in the county. That's what they do in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, and it's been very successful in keeping that whole region propped up, and so there's less disparity between the richest and the poorest communities.
Grace, there you go. Any chance that that's going to become part of the Vibrant Neo discussion on the launch board? This kind of tax policy discussion that we're having right now?
I will say, Mr. Weingart's come up with a very interesting idea, and I think it's absolutely worthwhile to bring it up to them.
Terrific. Well, you two have met each other tonight, so hopefully the conversation will continue. We're seeing public policy in the making. It'll be exciting. So here's the regional Vibrant Neo vision, which foresees a greener, healthier, more economically and environmentally sustainable Northeast Ohio. And I think what I like about this map is that it's really dominated by the colors of the land uses, and you really don't see those faint outlines of the counties so much. So it's kind of like a one region vision. But underlying this is the idea that we need to strengthen mass transit across the region and connect these counties and downtown markets so that workers who live in households that may not have a car or only one car and need to get to a job that's somewhere far away can get there quicker by mass transit. This is the kind of thing that I think basic public policy question for Ohio. It's so fundamental. I wanted to ask the panel, we could start from Glenn down at the far end. We spend so little money, state money in Ohio on mass transit. I think we rank 40th among the 50 states, even though our population places us at what, number 7? I think we're number 7, but we rank 40th in terms of spending on transportation, mass transit from the Ohio Department of Transportation. Glenn, any idea about how we change that? Would that be an important thing for Cleveland and Cuyahoga County? How would you see that as a game changer for planning in our region?
Well, I think Grace is probably better equipped to answer the question, but it goes directly to federal transportation policy. You're not going to build any kind of rail without federal help. And
Well, I didn't say rail. This could be rubber tire. We could be talking buses here, too.
let's talk about buses then. That's a little more affordable.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at this map here. There are bus rapid transit lines that would extend from Cuyahoga down through Summit to Stark, for example.
I'd have to look at the numbers to see what the demand is for something like this before I could really get on board. Again, I would go back to what do we already have in the core, that being RTA, whether it's transit, rail, bus, and how is that being maintained and served and expanded to serve the people that the demand is there. I don't know how we can justify the dollar per mile cost of what rail would be, or even a long distance bus rapid transit, without population growth projections to go along with it. And I'm afraid we won't even get our foot in the door to any funder without showing some kind of uptick in our population. And
Well, it's kind of a chicken-egg thing, isn't it? If you spend the money on it, then you're going to change land values around the transportation route, and then you're going to build the audience to use the transit, right? Is that transit-oriented development?
we're fighting the policymakers that have sort of set it up that way, and that's the challenge I think we're faced with.
Right.
Without the ridership,
So it's got to be demand first, and you're building the transit to mitigate congestion.
it is. And I had the pleasure of living in the Atlanta metropolitan area for 11 years, and if you want to talk about traffic and congestion, and the state of Georgia puts $0 into MARTA or any of the transit in
Right.
Atlanta, and it's a mess. And so they've been fighting it for 25 years, not as long as we have. But people are leaving that area because they can't get around. They're spending their entire life in their car. And it's...
Eventually that comes home to roost, that problem for region, sure. Lee, how big a lift would it be to change transportation spending patterns in Ohio?
So I have a different take maybe on it. You can build as many rail lines, buses as you want in Cuyahoga County or in Ohio until you make driving so expensive that people will choose that form of transportation. You're never going to get any use out of it. So whether it be San Francisco or London, which charges you to bring a car into the city, in London it's prohibitive to bring a car into the city, you're never going to change that mindset of Ohio Americans to own their car. And woe be it to the politician who puts on a $50 a day charge to come into the city of Cleveland or into anywhere else. So I think the reality is, rather than focusing on public transportation, which is not unimportant, it is important, I'd rather see us focus on getting live, work opportunities so we have to drive less. You can work and live near where you are. So Cleveland's doing that, as we talked about earlier. You've got a lot of housing downtown, you've got young people coming downtown, they're walking to work instead of driving to work. I just think the reality of being an American is we love our cars. Until they're so expensive we can't drive them anymore, we'll continue to drive them.
Yeah, so David, you've said in public statements that I've heard you make that you think the age of the car is ending, but I mean, what Lee is also saying is a reality now. How do you view this situation? Can we change the transportation spending patterns in Ohio?
So the cost factor is really important. It costs over $7,000 a year to own and maintain a car these days. So for a large segment of the population, that is a real burden, which is why transit is becoming more popular. There's greater demand. RTA sees increasing ridership every year. And people want it, especially young people. They're moving into cities, into walkable neighborhoods where they don't have to be burdened by car ownership. It's actually a really liberating experience if you can get rid of your car and survive without one. Americans go to European cities where they have wonderful transportation systems that offer you all kinds of choices and don't make you dependent on a car. And we wonder, why can't America be like that? Well, we could if we made the right investments and made different public policy choices.
Yeah, Grace, how realistic is this diagram that we're looking at here? That's from Vibrant.
Well, that was a wish list of many folks who participated, and that's not necessarily a recommendation that came out of it specifically. But I think the tide is shifting in that vehicle miles traveled by automobile have been decreasing, while public transit use has been increasing. A lot of that's due to the recession that we had, but a lot of it's due to actual changing attitudes in the millennial generation, as well as the aging population being more dependent on public transit and finding it more attractive. At the state level, it's a hard sell primarily because Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, is really the only part of the state that has a substantive transit system, and that we would be asking for money just for ourselves. Joe Calabrese, who's head of the RTA, often cites a fact that the RTA in Cleveland carries more passengers annually than the rest of the state systems combined. I mean, all of the rest of the cities. So when we think about how to get the state to change their perspective, my colleagues in Columbus and in Cincinnati are now demanding public transit as well, and they're looking for change. And as the population starts to demand it more, we present that to the elected officials. I think the elected officials are very responsive to their constituents, and if the demand is there and we make that push, I do see things changing.
Okay, I'm going to go now to some audience questions. We may get back to our flow of images here for a minute, but some of these I think are very pointed, so I wanted to ask a panel to think about this. This is just a very direct, simple question. What should Cuyahoga County be asking from our neighbors, such as Geauga, Lorraine, or Medina? Who would like to tackle that? Given that we had the pattern that Mr. Beyer outlined here.
Partnership.
And what form would that take, David? You've got some thoughts about taxation patterns that are pulling people further out from Cork County. And
well, I mean, there is a group of mayors in Northeast Ohio that wants to implement that regional tax-based sharing program that they have in the Twin Cities. But I mean, basically, if you talk to a rural township out in Cuyahoga County, their job to make a more sustainable region would be not to grow. You'd protect their farmland. And don't expect, for the rest of the region to support a new industrial park there or a new shopping center there. That we should be building on our current assets where we already have infrastructure and other things that make development sustainable.
I've got two here for Grace, so I'm going to combine them. Can you give us one example of what your top priority would be for implementation out of Vibrant Neo? Just one thing that's at the top of your list. What's the most urgent thing for you to see implemented out of this plan?
Strengthening established communities. So helping communities to identify themselves, and it doesn't have to be simply Cleveland. We're talking about established communities in each of the counties. There's Medina City, or there's Chardon, or there's Lorain and Elyria. So, and even in Cuyahoga County, there's Lakewood, and there's Cleveland Heights and Shaker. So there's many communities that are already established. Let's try to make sure we're strengthening them and then making sure that they've got the same opportunities and the same interest as the other communities.
Another question. Can local governments in any scenario be financially sustainable without decreasing the relative amount of single-family housing? I think what this questioner is saying is, does a tax base based on single-family housing pay for the cost of operating a community? David, you're shaking your head. You understand the question, right?
If you do, they call them cost of community services studies, and generally, and maybe Glenn would probably know more than I do about this, but houses don't pay their way, especially if those houses have kids of school age, and you've got to pay for the schooling, whereas commercial and industrial land uses do pay their way, which is why every community wants to have their own shopping area, their own industrial park, to balance out their tax base.
Right, and they want to attract customers from a regional market, right?
And that's why they also want higher end housing, so that they zone their land to exclude the poor.
Right, okay, so let me go to another image here.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Glenn, please.
As we help communities with their master plans and figure out what their priorities are for the future, looking ahead 10, 20 years, there may be a community that's primarily a residential community, and they are very used to having 24-hour services at their beck and call. For example, dispatch, police, fire, where you have 12 firemen sleeping through the night at the fire station, and they might go out one night a month in a community that has, I'm exaggerating. But the point is, there might need to be an adjustment in expectation of the level of services that are available versus what's needed. And those are the kind of conversations I think that a community is going to have. And if they're prepared to do that and make some of those adjustments, they may be able to sustain themselves a little bit longer. But it's already happening with the dispatch. There's discussions about other types of building inspections and other things that cities have to do that they don't do very often, that I think you'll see some partnerships start to develop. And then in that way, they may be able to buy some time and sustain a little bit with the primarily residential tax base. That's not fun to say either, but it's reality.
Now, I'm getting a sense from some of these questions that there's almost a sense of fatigue about how long we've been having these discussions in Northeast Ohio, and that we may not be getting traction on them. But I want to turn this in a different direction. I have behind you images of projects that are showing how we are very successfully adaptively reusing historic properties in Cleveland, redeveloping underused pieces of land, and here I'm referring specifically to the Uptown development in University Circle, which just a few years ago was parking lots and a strip shopping center. In fact, 4 acres of just broken asphalt there on what was called the Hessler Beach. And that's now an award-winning development with world-class architecture and urban design. There's the Flats East Bank project, which is higher and denser and more economically vibrant, at least in terms of the planning. We'll see how it goes when it opens later this summer. And then Detroit Shoreway. So, panel, with these examples, are these the kind of things that we ought to be doing everywhere? And why can't we do more of it? Is it very difficult to do? Lee, you want to address
So let me
that?
expand upon the core just a little bit. These are all wonderful projects. I mentioned earlier the land bank, which is in the core of Cleveland. I'll talk about a project now that we were involved in out in Orange Village, just about a stone's throw from here. There were 45 or so houses on a street called Pinecrest, which runs between Harvard and Chagrin. 30 years ago, it was a gated community. In fact, there was the remnants of a gate on Harvard you can see as you come into Pinecrest. But over 30 years, it became a cut-through between Chagrin and Harvard. So the residents decided they didn't really want to have houses there anymore, and a developer, who was a client of ours, decided he would buy up the houses and change the use of that property from some abandoned houses, some occupied, one burned out, but not probably the greatest part of Orange Village, to a much higher use. So creative, smart redevelopment of existing infrastructure and existing land. Across Harvard, I will tell you, is a green space that could have been equally good for this project, but our client decided to take the hard road of buying 45 houses over the course of about 3 years. So that project is going through. It's called Pinecrest. You've read about it, I'm sure, in the Sun News and other places. It is, in my estimation, smart redevelopment of a maybe kind of a tangential core community in Cuyahoga County. It will generate for the schools, Orange schools, $3 million a year in new revenue. And for Orange Village, $1.5 million in revenue. So rather than disturb green space in a community in eastern Cuyahoga County, we got involved and got the land rezoned, and it'll be rebuilt, as I mentioned, as a combination of commercial, retail, and housing.
So we need more idealistic developers.
Yes.
Right? How do we?
Fairmont Properties.
Yeah. Okay, terrific. David, you want to talk about these projects? How do we get more of this going?
I think that's the right question. How do we ramp this up?
Yeah.
I mean, there are some really encouraging examples of good mixed-use, higher-density development happening. There seems to be a growing market for that. We especially see that in downtown Cleveland and some of the other neighborhoods in Cleveland. So that's great. But these developments, I think, are still more difficult oftentimes for developers. It is harder to assemble the land. You've got a lot of difficult politics. There's a lot of interest involved that have to be met. So these are very complex projects, and not all developers are capable of.
Not all developers are capable. You need, skilled local practitioners, people who are really rooted in this community, like Fairmount, right?
Yeah, and so one more point I guess to make on Van Aken, but also on the Pinecrest project is you need to have governments cooperating on the project. So on Pinecrest, we had a TIF, tax increment financing mechanism, to help cover some of the cost of the infrastructure that goes into the project. And on Van Aken, there'll be, I think it's a 75% TIF that'll cover the infrastructure on that project. That's largely because Shaker Heights has very high property taxes.
Can you define TIF for the audience? Because
so tax
not everyone
increment financing means you take the increased value of the property, the tax is coming from that new value, and you apply it to the cost of the public infrastructure on the property. So the sidewalks, the sewers, the parking decks, not privately owned property, but publicly available infrastructure property. It works because it's a partnership of the community and the developer and the citizens in the community, and really the surrounding communities. And it brings everybody together, and it creates a pool of money that without the project wouldn't exist in the first place. So you're not taking money that already exists, because the existing property taxes stay with the school or the county or the city, wherever they are. It's only that incremental, that increased value, you take a portion of that and you put it back into the project. And in a place like Shaker Heights, where you're paying 4% of your house value every year in property taxes, you need to have some kind of relief, or you'll never do development of that kind of creative nature. And that's what I think the TIF gives you, that development, that relief you need in Shaker Heights to make that project before.
Glenn, when you started out with your opening statement to my question, you were talking about the American dream as it once was. And David here was talking about, in response, that was kind of a monoculture. We only did things one way. Are we getting smarter now about figuring out different ways to do things so that we can take a piece of urban land and make a more complex, dense, rich mix of uses on it, using things like TIF and other tools that we just didn't have before? Are we getting better at planning and urban design?
Who's we?
Our society.
I think there are examples of it working well. I think there's examples of it being made way too complicated with certain types of regulations that just have good intent but are too complicated.
Let's get as specific on that. What do you mean?
Well, I think there's some communities that try to encourage something called form-based codes, where you really try to say, we want the buildings to look like something, and we don't really mind what the land uses are in those buildings. It can be residential, it can be office, it can be retail, but we want it to look like something. Well, people weren't very comfortable with that because they still wanted to know what was going to move in next door to them. So, plus to manage that from a staff perspective of a planning office is just enormous. So, I think the development community, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think the development community knows what those limitations are, how far they can go, and what their parameters are. One of the things I do think we're starting to get better at is realizing that people have different cycles in their lives. When young people are ready to get out of the mom and dad's house, they're going to be looking for a place that they're going to rent, they're going to want to be downtown, and they're going to want to be there for several years. They're going to meet somebody, hopefully, at one of these bars at 4 a.m., take Uber home, and eventually get married, have kids, and they're probably going to move to the suburbs. Now, when the kids are grown up, when they get to be our age, and the kids are gone, they're going to start looking back to come downtown again. Then there's going to come a point they're going to retire, and Florida's going to sound real good. But then they bounce back here. Beachwood, we're doing their master plan. I'm blown away by the number of people in Beachwood in the 80 to 90 year age category. And I've never seen a cohort like that in my life. And there's a line, there's a waiting list for people to get into the places that are here. And those are people that have probably left and come back, or I don't know exactly what's, but the numbers are enormous. And so I think these life cycles tell us what type of development to build. And before, it was all just build one thing and everybody will fit.
Just really quickly, since you raised this issue, it's kind of fascinating. If the upper age cohort is so big in Beachwood, what are the physical planning implications of that? What kind of changes would we see in the environment of this community that has some very, very wide streets with a lot of fast traffic and
Other master plan was done in 3 months. There were some really interesting recommendations in there, and the city is really grappling with that. It's a major growth area for the city, and I think there's 2 or 3 towers proposed to be added to the development there next to the mall, and it's just amazing, and the numbers seem to continue to be growing for everything.
That's fascinating.
Well, Steve, you're certainly seeing, the view, for example, the new apartment at Green and Sugar.
That's right.
Very popular. There's another one that talks about going up on Park East, right by 271. We know of a group in Solon that's looking to do upscale apartment, multifamily. So I think one of the realities is changing housing patterns in these maybe east side communities, only but maybe west side as well, is you're going to try and keep those folks from going to Florida or coming back here from Florida. You got to have sort of what they expect to, what they want to see in an apartment. They don't maybe want a house anymore, but they want a very nice upscale multifamily apartment complex. And you're seeing some of that already starting on the east side.
They want it walkable and they want transit, right?
Yeah.
Right. Another positive example of adaptation in Cuyahoga County that I want to point out is a plan that Glenn and his shop have been working on over the past year, the East Side Greenway, which would weave a series of high-quality bike trails and recreational paths, 120 miles in all, through, 19 East Side communities connecting to the city of Cleveland, the shoreline of Lake Erie, the towpath trail, Opportunity Corridor, and so on. Glenn, would you say a word about what is the potential of this to change land use patterns in Cuyahoga County?
Well, first of all, thanks to Grace, NOACA provided a transportation for livable centers, communities grant to help us do this work. And it started out with 14 communities loosely organized and thinking about how they can connect a few missing links. And by the time we were done, we had 19 communities. We have another 10 that want to be part of it. And we've got the folks on the south side and the west side of the county clamoring, we want one of these too. So Grace, you'll be seeing soon us coming back to do more of this. But what this did was it got these 14, 19 communities together to think, okay, sure, I might be able to afford to build a certain segment of this, but then it's going to dead end and my neighbor's not going to be able to pick it up. What this did, what this was able to do is get these cities talking to each other so that they know and have the confidence that, okay, I can't build it this year, but next year I'm going to connect to something that's real. And then from that, it's going to connect to even a bigger network that gets me downtown, gets me to the towpath trail, gets me to metro parks. So this map here represents an enormous range of some on-road, some off-road, some improved trails that already exist. There's all kinds of different solutions that we proposed for this, and this is a very long-range implementation plan. But the idea is it's a network. The idea is that these communities got together and said, yeah, this sounds like a great idea, it's something to work together on. And so the bike community is extremely vocal and supportive and showed up at the meetings. We had RTA and Metro Parks folks who were really excited about this because every RTA bus has 3 bike racks on the front of it, every single one. And by the way, there's a garage that's full of bikes that people leave on RTA buses. They're amazed at the number of people that take the trouble to put their bike on the front of the bus and then forget it. So anyway, there's lots of advantages to it, but I think, Steve, what you're getting at is the biggest advantage. We got these communities to sit down at the same table and say, yeah, we do have something in common. And if it starts with something like trails and bikeways and missing links to get people around other than their car, then it might be able to transform into discussions about land use and these idea of sharing tax revenues.
So I guess to this point here, I'll go back to the Pinecrest project in Orange Village. Part of the way we got ultimate support from the community and from the mayor and from council was to promise to build I think it's an 11-mile bike trail throughout Orange Village. So now, once our project is done, our retail residential project is done, we will include with that this bike trail that will connect every house in Orange Village. Which, if you know Orange Village, there's Old Orange and there's New Orange. Some sidewalks, no sidewalks. And so, for folks who live in Orange or want to go over to Orange, there'll be essentially a bike path, a running path, a way to connect that community without having to get in your car and drive around. So it's part of our project.
Right, I'm showing you here a cross-section of how a traditional street or avenue or boulevard in the city of Cleveland could be redesigned to make it more bike-friendly. David, you want to say something about this bike revolution, and does it have staying power? Is it really a transformative thing in terms of land use?
Well, I think it's been exciting to see the rise of bike advocacy in Northeast Ohio. We now have a very good nonprofit organization by Cleveland that's leading a lot of this. And there's just tremendous interest that seems to be exploding all over. However, it's still a very small part of the transportation equation. Less than 1% of trips still are by bike. So starting from a very low base, compared to some European countries where you might have 30 or 40% of trips by bike, because they've invested in this amazing, that they've got the map that you were showing, 3 or 4 times over already built. So making cycling safer and sort of mode of choice for more people, I think is the mission of a lot of these groups. And there's a lot. Some people will say, well, it's Cleveland, the weather's bad, people aren't going to do this. But even in Minneapolis, they're getting like a 5 or 6% mode split for bikes, and it's colder there than it is here. So if you invest in the right facilities, you might be surprised at how many people are going to start riding bikes.
Great. So we did get a question about opportunity corridors, so I want to address that next. This is probably the biggest effort in Cuyahoga County right now in terms of wholesale land use change over very large geography. We're looking at a map of about 400 acres of land that would be up for some kind of transformation, and this is in a classic, historically disinvested part of Cleveland that has lost an enormous amount of population, You can drive down some of the streets here and just, not see any houses at all. So the state of Ohio decided a few years ago to devote bond issue money from the turnpike tolls to invest in this $300 million roadway, which is going to extend from I-490 at East 55th Street to connect the interstate system in a better way to University Circle, and in the process so hopefully transform this neighborhood. And I show you a quote here from Harriet Tregoning, who's the head of the HUD program that actually funded the Vibrant NEO plan. And she was here a couple of weeks ago to speak about implementing Vibrant NEO, and she said, hey folks, if you're going to do anything, you got to get Opportunity Corridor right. And by right, I think she means redevelop this into a very vibrant, job-rich and dense area of employment and residential development, because you have the two RTA lines, the red line and the blue-green line running through this area. You have this new boulevard that's coming. It's going to be finished in 2019. And it just poses an enormous challenge to this community in terms of getting the zoning right, getting the urban design right, assembling the land, and then recruiting the developers, and finding out what are the economic uses for this property and for these properties, and how do you get this vibrant development. I don't think anything like it has ever been tried in Cleveland or Northeast Ohio. So I just want to get our panel to talk about this for a minute, and I know we're running close on time here, so if you could keep your comments brief. Tell us what you think about Opportunity Corridor. Glenn, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you.
That was not very enthusiastic.
No, I have a very interesting perspective on Opportunity Corridor. I think the road is being put in there to speed travel from one point to another, and that's fine. I also think if in doing that, it gives us an opportunity to take a look at how the land use of the rest of the community that surrounds it is going to be used. I think that's fine too. I have a problem with trying to accomplish both at the same time. In other words, if the road is designed to move traffic quickly through there, how are you going to put a bunch of development fronting on it and make it work? Now, that development is planned so it doesn't have to empty onto Opportunity Corridor, but it uses RTA, it uses the surface streets, it uses the grid pattern that's already there. Fine. And I think there are some plans that are doing that, but I'm very hesitant, and I'm probably in the minority and shouldn't even be saying this, but I feel like say what it is. It's a road to get you from 490 to 55th to University Circle. That's what it is. But I also think we do have an opportunity to make sure that we revitalize the neighborhood while we're at it. But I'm not sure that putting a bunch of curb cuts on our newly built road to get us from point A to point B is I don't think it's worked in the past, and I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to work in the future.
Lee?
I'm a skeptic. I think it's a way to bring West Siders to the East Side. I don't know, is that a good thing? I'm an East Side snob.
We're all in it together.
I'm not certain I understand the value. I mean, I can get from my house to 490 pretty quickly. I can get from my house to the Circle pretty quickly. I'm not sure I understand the value of a $300 million investment. There are probably better ways to spend $300 million in the city of Cleveland or in the region than that. I mean, I've been wrong before. I'll probably be wrong on this one, but I don't see the vision yet.
Okay, David.
So I live at Shaker Square, and my mother happens to live in Bay Village. So this road's going to be great for me. So every week when I go visit her, it's going to shave off 3 minutes off my.
Not even probably. I mean, Shaker Square.
I'm with Glenn. I think that this is a road that will make it easier for suburban commuters from the west and the south to get to University Circle. If better highway access were the cure, then Carnegie would be an incredible street right now. It's not. So, the $300 million, if you really want to do something with that neighborhood, you would spend on transit-oriented development around the 3 rapid transit stations that are already there.
Grace.
Well, it's funny that you put that quote up there because I was thinking earlier as I was planning for the session that should you ask me about opportunity corridor, that was the quote I was going to make. So we could either get it gloriously right or horribly wrong. And I think there are some concerns that the project did start with the idea that it would be moving people from point A to point B and not so much about the environment and the community. I think that has changed dramatically. I think that the communities have spoken, and I think the folks who are building the road have listened, and so they're working very hard to combine and make it both a road that will move people as well as add to it the opportunity for true economic growth. It will be a test.
A test of our capacity and ingenuity to be able to get in front of this and take advantage of this opportunity. But Glenn, you're not seeing it yet.
No, I mean, I think there's definitely a chance to redevelop the neighborhood. I just don't want to see 3,000 curb cuts on our new $300 million road.
Okay.
That's not the way it's going to work.
Right.
I don't think if you have enough wealth in that area to interest enough developers to do a development that we would like, as opposed to doing gas stations and 7-Elevens and stuff that we've already got plenty of already, I think.
Right. That would be terrible.
Can we end on something other than opportunity corridor?
I'm going there. You may not like this one either, though. We have a great question from one of our audience members, which I'll just read. Could an urban growth boundary benefit Cuyahoga County? Is that the kind of thing that we could try in this region? It's been done in other parts of the country. And again, I'll just ask the panel to, Lee, you're looking.
What's the term?
It's, you have a boundary on where you can develop.
I got it, okay.
Right? As has been done in the Portland, Oregon region. And Grace, do you have any views about that, urban growth boundary? Do you see that as coming out of Barbara Neo?
Well, I think urban growth boundaries can be very successful tools in controlling land use patterns, as we talked about at the beginning of the program. However, at this point in time, I don't see Northeast Ohio accepting something like growth boundaries. So if there were anything that could sort of mimic the growth boundaries concept, but yet not be regulatory and be voluntary and have each individual community sort of think through how it works for them, I think that would be the approach to take. So more collegial kinds of discussions and agreements on how to grow as opposed to a mandate.
Because that'll never work in Northeast Ohio.
It won't happen.
Yeah, the politics will never happen here in Ohio for a growth boundary. And even from a practical matter, where would you put it in Northeast Ohio? We have a very complicated pattern of settlement around the region with all these different cities. So kind of, there's no one center point and one edge that you put the boundary around. So I'm not sure where it would even go.
Well, I guess that's, as Cuyahoga County relates to its exurban county neighbors, Medina and Lorraine, I would just quote Donald Trump. Build a wall and make them pay for it.
I got to follow Donald Trump. I would say two things. And one, for an urban growth boundary to be effective, you have to have growth. And unfortunately, we don't have growth. And the second thing is it would probably be drawn outside the boundaries of Cuyahoga County, so sure, I'm all for it.
Is there any, maybe last question here, is there any part of the country that you think we ought to be looking at in terms of regions that are dealing successfully with these issues? Just a quick round of responses. You folks travel a lot, you've been to a lot of places. Who should we be looking at? Grace, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I'll throw out Chicago. Chicago's a very different city than Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. It's very different than Northeastern Illinois, but they do have some of the same issues and concerns about sprawl. They have people that have filled in those areas, and so it's not quite as negative in terms of the pattern as it has happened here, but looking at how they have managed to address some of those issues, they've got a lot of different success stories, and so I'd say we should go to Chicago.
Chicago. David?
I think the motto in North America for me would be Vancouver in British Columbia. They have very aggressive goals for reducing driving, increasing transit and biking and walking, increasing density. They really believe that if they're going to maintain themselves as a world-class city in the future and be competitive, they're going to be a low-energy, low-carbon city and be at the forefront of fighting climate change. So they take that very seriously, and that's where their public investments are headed.
Litt?
Tough one. I think it's tough to overlay any city upon any other city, so I'd rather just see Cleveland focus on what it does well, which is to try and attract young people downtown and keep them there, and then leverage our water, because in 15 years, water will be more important than oil.
Great. Glenn?
I would have said the exact same thing. Exactly the same thing. I think there's so many unique aspects that we have here that other cities don't have that conglomeration with the opportunity and with the space that we have to do it in. Chicago is so dense already, and to get anywhere near the type of developable land there is so far out. And they're connected, yes, but it's much, much higher population. There's things that Indianapolis has done really well. There's things Pittsburgh has done really well. I wouldn't want to be exactly like either one of those, but I would build off the lead and say that we figure out the things that we have and other people don't, and run with those. And I think we make our own way. And I don't think we have to be like somebody else.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the panel for exploring these topics with us tonight. And I hope that as you go home tonight, that you reflect on some of the positives that have been discussed here tonight. We have a great regional plan that is moving towards voluntary implementation, hopefully at some level. You saw some great examples of local development and some discussion of the local developers who are exercising their talents to make better places that are going to hold our affection over the long haul in Northeast Ohio. So thank you, panel, for a great discussion, and thank you all for coming tonight.